Carlson, tonight, the news keeps coming. The president scheduled to speak tonight at a rally in Montana, one of the great states. We'll take you there live as soon as he does begin. It got very heated on Capitol Hill today at the confirmation hearing for the president's pick for the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh. That hearing is still going on at this hour. In just a minute, we'll show you some of the intense altercations, including the one with Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, which was amazing. But first, Donald Trump has complained for months that the permanent class in Washington is working in secret to undermine his presidency. Virtually everyone in Washington thinks that's hilarious. It's ludicrous, they say. It's delusional. The very fact that Trump says stuff like that means he's probably mentally ill, a nut. The guy sitting next to you on the bus babbling about the Trilateral Commission. It's sad. But suddenly, they're not saying that anymore. Why? Because yesterday afternoon, the New York Times ran an anonymous op-ed that confirmed every single one of Trump's supposedly paranoid claims and many more. It turns out executive branch employees are, in fact, working secretly to stop the president's agenda. Unaccountable functionaries are actually conducting a bureaucratic coup against him. It's all real. So how did Washington respond to the news that Trump was right? Well, by calling for him to be removed from office without an election. Here's Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts.
If senior administration officials think that the President of the United States is not able to do his job, then they should invoke the 25th Amendment.
In an interview with CNN last night, former Secretary of State John Kerry seemed to agree. He announced that America is in the midst of a full-blown constitutional crisis.
This is unbelievable. This is a presidency this is a genuine constitutional crisis.
Well, for once, John Kerry is right. It is unbelievable. It is a constitutional crisis, but not for the reasons he thinks. America is a constitutional democracy. The central principle of our system is that voters rule. Voters elect politicians to do their will. Politicians who listen to voters get to keep their jobs. Those who don't listen get fired. Elections make our system accountable. Voters get to decide who's in charge because ultimately voters themselves are in charge. That's why under our Constitution, the chief decision makers are politicians. They're elected. In the executive branch of government, all power derives from the president. He and the vice president are the only ones in the building who've been installed by voters. No one else has. So when an executive branch employee subverts the president, he is subverting the will of voters and therefore the Constitution. That used to be obvious. This isn't some crazy new legal theory. It's the basis of our democracy. And now it's crumbling. Trump won because he promised to do things that other politicians had been asked to do but failed to do. He pledged to keep the United States out of pointless wars, to protect our borders, and to renegotiate our trade deals. Voters wanted these things. They said so on Election Day. Permanent Washington did not want these things. So guess who's getting their way? Not voters. So what kind of government is that? It's not a democracy. It's something very different. It's a system where a small number of people you've never heard of and cannot fire make all the key decisions and reap most of the rewards. It's an oligarchy, and it's not even a straightforward oligarchy. If the 500 smartest, wisest, most decent people in America suddenly overthrew our government and took over, things might actually improve. Who knows? But that is not what's happening. Instead, the assistant deputy undersecretary of God knows what has decided that he is the king, and you are a moron, and we're doing things his way or else. But he's not even admitting that he's doing that. He hasn't held a press conference to announce he's in charge. Instead, he's doing it all in secret, purely for his own benefit and that of his friends. And if you call him on it, if you ask questions about it, he screams that you're a racist and cancels your Twitter account. Meanwhile, he never stops lecturing you about how vital democracy is and how you are somehow a threat to democracy. That's almost exactly what's happening right now. It's infuriating, and it's wrong. A few minutes ago, we spoke to California Congressman Eric Swalwell about it. Congressman, thanks a lot for joining us tonight.
Of course.
What would you do? You've got a staff in Washington, of course, and in California. What would you do if you found out that a member of your staff was trying to subvert your policy goals, taking memos off your desk, hiding information from you, making decisions that you had not approved, leaking that information to the press? How would you feel about that?
They'd be gone, Tucker. They wouldn't be working for me, but I hope that I'd hire people who wouldn't have to do that.
What do you mean have to do that? So if you're elected by your constituents, by the voters of your district, to do the things that you run on. So you say, I'm going to do this, and not everyone agrees with those objectives, but the voters who voted for you did. So you get elected, you try to do those things, and your staff decides, you know what, that's unwise. He shouldn't be doing those things, and we don't care what the voters elected him to do because we don't care about voters themselves. We're going to stop those things from happening. Would that be a democratic process, would you say?
No, it's not democratic. And I believe that Donald Trump was elected as president, and we should be able to see who he is. And the fact that these aides are going rogue, and I don't think they're patriotic at all, I blame that squarely I lay that blame squarely at the feet of Congress. This Congress has not checked the president, and so now we're in this position where we have a new branch of government, these aides who think that they get to decide what's right or wrong, and they prevent the president from doing what he wants to do, and that prevents democracy from working and truly understanding what the intents and directions are of this president. That's a problem.
That's the weirdest talking point I think I've ever heard. I'm not sure I fully understand it, but let's get very specific. The New York Times op-ed from yesterday afternoon said that the president was attempting or resisting efforts to increase the severity of sanctions on Russia. Now, I know that you're for more aggressive sanctions on Russia. Many people are. But the president was elected on the opposite position, which is we should normalize relations with Russia to a greater extent. So by taking that position, he was representing the will of the people who voted for him, and yet his staff didn't agree, so they tried to prevent that from happening. That right there is democracy short-circuited, isn't it, by definition?
The staff doing that absolutely is democracy short-circuited, Tucker, but I also believed in the rule of changed circumstances. We learned after the election the full extent of what Russia did to meddle in the election, so the circumstances changed. Congress should have fully intervened to make sure that this president was checked and that his worst instincts to draw us closer to Russia were not fulfilled.
Okay, well, you're making a separate point about what should happen in Congress, and maybe it's a fair point or maybe it's not, and we don't actually know that much about what Russia did.
We know Congress has done zero, right? They've done nothing to check them.
Well, they did. I think we did actually sanction Russia. But the point is about the president and the executive branch of government. And all power in the executive branch derives from the guy who's elected. There are only two people in the entire executive branch, more than 100,000 employees, two people elected, president, vice president. That's it. So anybody subverting the decisions of the president is subverting the Constitution by definition. So why are Democrats applauding this? Don't you want the president to do the things that he said he was going to do?
Yeah, Tucker, I'm not applauding this at all. I actually believe that the patriotic thing to do is to come forward and then raise your right hand before a congressional committee and tell that committee what concerns you. And if you are a Republican at home right now and you find comfort that aides are working in this way to prevent the president from abusing his power, you are on the waypoint to electing a Democratic Congress, but you should let elected leaders check the president, not his aides. And so I share the same concerns you have.
Because last time I checked, and again, what you're doing is making a kind of sophisticated argument that, again, I don't fully understand.
God forbid we're sophisticated here, Tucker.
Well, I'm not sure sophisticated may be the wrong word. You're making a kind of confusing argument designed to promote Democrats in the upcoming midterm election. So I get that that's a priority for you.
Well, I believe in the Constitution that we check the president, not his aides.
Right. I'm not sure you believe in the Constitution, but let's just get to that question.
Why do you think I don't believe in the Constitution?
Well, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because you're a member of a party that is calling for removing a duly elected president from office without an election.
I haven't called for that. I have not called for that.
So what do you make of Elizabeth Warren calling for that today, in effect, saying we need to, his aides don't like him, they don't agree with his policy goals, we need to invoke the 25th Amendment and remove him without an election? What do you think of that?
I think we need to invoke democracy. We're going to do that in about 60 days, and then we're going to conduct the investigations the Republicans have been unwilling to conduct and follow the evidence. That's what I believe.
Yeah, the evidence. You know, for 2 years you've been telling me there's evidence of collusion. It still hasn't arisen.
And I went on your show and I showed you, and if you want to do another 30 minutes of that, we can do it again.
I didn't want to be mean, so I stopped that segment. But let's just get back to the point. So you would say that Elizabeth Warren and all of those calling for removing the elected president without having an election.
I don't think that's what she said. That's not what she said, but I
Well,
think she believes what I believe. Let's have a new Congress.
She just said it. We just played a soundbite saying that this op-ed and the complaints of his staff are evidence that we need to remove him without having an election. Lots of people are saying that. It's not just the senator from Massachusetts. It's a lot of different Democrats.
I speak for myself, and I act for myself, Tucker.
Wait, okay, but it's your party, and you're telling our viewers that they need to vote for your party in the election in 60 days. But again, in case you didn't see it, here's the Elizabeth Warren soundbite once more, just so you know what we're talking about. Listen.
If senior administration officials think that the President of the United States is not able to do his job, then they should invoke the 25th Amendment.
Okay, so if bureaucrats elected by nobody disagree with the policy goals that voters ratified in the last election, the president should be removed without an election.
Well, no,
so
she
why
said
is that?
if there's evidence.
You're on the look. What do you mean? That's what she said.
She said, and she's referring to the Constitution.
Of democracy. Okay.
She's referring to the Constitution. She's saying there's a remedy in the Constitution if these anonymous aides believe that this is out there, and I agree. Show us the evidence.
But hold on. Believe that what is out there? The op-ed, which I read, doubtless you read too, says two things. One, the president is mercurial, says all kinds of wild things, which, by the way, he does in public every day. We knew that, okay, and the government's still functioning. And two, that he's doing lots of things that the permanent Washington class doesn't like. He's too nice to Russia. He's against free trade. He's letting, he wants to secure our borders. That's grounds for removal without an election?
Tucker, I think it may surprise you. We're more aligned on this issue than you think. I don't support what these aides are doing. I think the best way to check the president is to have the Congress check the president.
I'm not talking about the aides. I think we're in agreement there. I think you have a right to disagree with the president. You don't have a right to subvert his authority if you want to.
Let's conduct the investigations that the Republicans want to.
But hold on. Okay, talking point. But I want you to comment on what we just heard from Elizabeth Warren. What would be the grounds specifically?
Elizabeth Warren is saying those aides should show themselves and show the evidence, and I agree with her on that. Show the evidence.
What evidence of what would be the criteria?
It
What's
wasn't
the threshold?
me. It was the president's own senior administration official who said that the 25th Amendment was being discussed. That's something I'd like to learn more about, because it's concerning that the president may be so dangerous and reckless.
It's so funny because you spent the last
I don't want a
you spent
danger
the last 2 years
to
telling
national
us
security governing our country, so I would want to learn more about that. So let's collect that evidence.
Oh, see, I thought you were against subverting democracy. I thought you've been lecturing us for 2 years.
No, I want to do
happening.
lawful investigations and let justice
sounds like you're engaged in it to a greater extent than Russia was. Just my view. Congressman, thank you. Great to see you.
My pleasure. You too.
Michael.